White starts the game with d4 and black responds with knight to f6, and this opening is called as the Indian defense or the Indian game opening. So what's the idea behind these moves? So by playing d4, white is getting a pawn in the center of the board and is controlling these key squares in the black's territory. And black here, instead of getting one of his pawn in the center, he decides to control the center squares with his knight. So he plays knight to f6. So black's idea over here is that he is allowing white to establish a strong center over here with the plan of ultimately undermining and destroying it in the later part of the game. So to understand this Indian defense opening in detail, let's dive into the main lines of this opening. So the first one is the Nimzo Indian defense. So here white starts with d4, black responds with knight to f6, and now white plays c4. Since black is not attacking in the center with his pawn, so white plays c4, grabbing queenside space as well as getting a very strong center on the board. Black here responds with e6, and the idea is that he is opening up the lines for his dark squared bishop. White responds with knight to c3, and now bishop to b4. Black is pinning white's knight, and in most of the games, black is really looking forward to swap this knight with his bishop so as to create double pawns on the c file, which will later become a big target for black's pieces. The next main line is Queen's Indian defense. So d4, knight f6, c4, e6, and now instead of developing the queenside knight, white may choose to develop the kingside knight first. So he plays knight to f3, and here black plays b6 with the idea to fianchetto his bishop on this long diagonal over here. Since white has already moved his pawns on the queen side, white is most likely going to castle on the king side. So developing his light square bishop on this diagonal would be a very good idea, as it would help black's pieces to launch a deadly attack on white's king. This opening is considered as very solid, safe, but somewhat drawish. However, world champion Anatoly Karpov was considered an expert in this opening. Moving on to the next main line, which is the Bogo Indian defense. So d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, and now black plays bishop to b4 check. This is a very solid opening, and here white will choose to block this check with either the move knight to c3 or knight b to d2 or even bishop to d2. Now comes the Blumenfeld counter gambit. So d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, and now black plays c5, directly challenging white's strong center on the board. If white takes the pawn, then black will be able to develop his bishop with a tempo. Also, black would end up with two center pawns and white would have only one center pawn. So therefore, in most of the cases, white refrains here to capture this pawn and instead plays d5, overextending the center pawn as well as attacking this e6 pawn over here. And now here, black chooses to play b5, attacking the base of this pawn structure. Black is gambiting a pawn over here in an attempt to build a very strong center on the board. So if white takes this pawn, then black will capture this center pawn over here and will end up getting a very good center control. And now comes the Catalan opening. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, and now g3. So what's the idea behind this move? So white here is combining two different ideas. First, that he is trying to gain queenside space with the move d4 and c4, as well as now he is planning to fianchetto his bishop on this diagonal so as to put more pressure on the black's queen side. And now let's move on to the Grunfeld defense. So d4, knight f6, c4, g6, and now as you can see that black here is preparing to fianchetto his bishop and is also looking forward to quickly castle in the game. White plays knight to c3, and now black strikes the center with d5. This is quite an interesting line of the Indian defense opening, and this was adopted by many world champions like Vasily Smyslov, Bobby Fischer, and our all-time favorite Garry Kasparov. Heading on to the most popular main line, and that is the King's Indian defense. So d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight to c3, and now bishop to g7. Black is quickly looking to castle in the game and then start attacking in the center so as to open up lines and to create a possibility for his pieces to attack the white's uncastled king. And now let's look at the Benoni defense. So d4, knight f6, c4, and now black plays c5, striking in the center. And black is really trying to unbalance this position and gain some active piece play at the cost of allowing white to play d5. If you're vibing with all of these amazing main lines, then hit that like button, and hey, for more chess mastery, smash subscribe. And now comes the Benko Gambit. It is also called as the Volga Gambit. So d4, knight f6, c4, c5, and black plays d5, refusing to accept this free pawn and grabbing more space in black's territory. Black obviously doesn't like this position, so he attacks the base of this pawn chain with the move b5. Black is gambiting a pawn over here to destroy white's strong center, as well as open up some lines on the queen side and create more pressure on white's queen side of the board. And now comes the old Indian defense. So d4, knight f6, c4, and now instead of e6, g6 or b6, black here plays d6, opening up lines for his light squared bishop. White responds with knight to c3, solidifying the control of his center squares. And now black strikes the center with the bold move e5. And here there are a lot of interesting options for white to respond. White may choose to capture this pawn, white may decide to just play d5 and cramp up black's position. But overall, this line is solid, but black's position might get cramped up in this opening. And now heading to the most popular Budapest Gambit. So d4, knight f6, c4, e5. Black is gambiting a pawn over here to get ahead in development and lay some cool traps for white pieces. I have already made a complete course on Budapest Gambit. So if you are interested in learning this line in detail, then go check out the playlist which is given in the description box below. And now it's time for the question of the day. So if you have understood today's opening well, then you should be able to answer this simple question. So the question is that in the Indian game opening, is black allowing white to build a strong center in the first couple of moves? Comment with a yes or a no, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep learning, keep practicing.